What's the weirdest thing you've seen at a friend's house that they thought was completely normal? Story 1. This doesn't count because it wasn't a friend, and I know that the fact that it's someone you're comfortable with is a big part of the reason for the thread, but this story's too much to not share. Cat litter, like over 1,000 pounds of litter. I was an investigator for the state, looking into child abuse and neglect cases, and got called to a house. Because the kids were always unclean, I went to the house completely expecting to just have to give the same old hygiene speech and assess the situation for hazard around the house. The instant I walked into the place, I was hit in the face with the horrid smell of ammonia. I've had cats my whole life, so I immediately knew where that smell came from. Cat could be used as a weapon. It really is the most intense-smelling liquid I've ever encountered. Immediately, I start looking around for the source of the smell, but it was coming from everywhere. No direction smelled worse, or better no matter where I walked in a house. That's when I looked up and noticed the ceiling of their TV room was sagging and wet. It looked like it could cave in. I asked if they were having any roof issues, and they said no. We were on the first floor, and there was a floor above us, so I figured the roof wasn't the culprit. I asked to go upstairs, and they said, "Oh, you don't want to go up there, that's the cat box." I walked upstairs and went to open the door to the room above the TV room, and the door was hard to push open like I was opening it onto the beach. I pushed harder and was hit with a wall of moist air and flies. Used cat litter was everywhere, all over the floor, bags and bags of litter dumped straight on the ground. They used that room as the cat box. They wouldn't clean it. They would just add another 20-pound bag to the pile and use a rake to spread it out to keep the hills down. I was mortified, but had to keep my composure, because you'll never get someone to understand what they're doing wrong if you come at them with no sense of understanding or compassion. The kids ended up being removed from that home. But not because of the litter. They disclosed other concerns that were proven to be accurate. But I'll never forget that sight, and can still smell it while I type this. Story to my best friend when I was in my late teens was Sicilian. His parents were right from there. First time I went to his house, they were hollering and screaming at each other. I was like, "Do you want me to leave?" And he said no. This is just how we talk. Every time I went to his house, someone was hollering. Story 3, my great aunt lived through the Great Depression. So she kept a lot of stuff. Not really hoarding, though, because she used everything up eventually. The one exception was styrofoam takeout cartons from the only restaurant she liked. When she died and we started cleaning out her house, we found decades worth of these cartons in her cellar. They were all closed, stacked very neatly, floor to ceiling, in dozens of columns, forming a white styrofoam wall that effectively halved the cellar. She had cleaned them all carefully, as there were no traces of food in them, though some had been stained by whatever food had once been in them. I was given the job of opening each one to make sure nothing of value had been left in them. After several hours, I confirmed that she had stored almost 2,000 styrofoam boxes and that not a single one had anything in it. Story 4, my friend told me not to use the towels in the bathroom to dry my hands because sometimes her brother wiped his with them when they ran out of toilet paper. Story 5, nest in the couch. Family has a giant, poorly trained cockatiel who free flies around the home and has made a foot wide and 8-inch deep nest inside the foam cushion on their couch, filled with debris like cardboard and bottle caps. They use the couch as if it wasn't there, even sitting on the sliver of cushion that the nest is on. Bonkers. When I was an elementary student, my best friend's dad kept a collage out where everyone could see it. His bedroom was in a nook in the living room, closed off some of the time by a curtain, and the collage took up a good section of the wall. It was made out of cutouts of magazines with extremely explicit pictures. We're talking vaginas leaking, breasts covered in, women sucking on penises, and of course penises and vaginas, all cut out so that it was just the body part without much context, like you didn't really see the whole woman's face, just her lips around and some of her nose. 6-year-old me thought it was pretty gross. Weirdly enough, this guy was a child psychologist, so anyway, my friend thought it was normal. My parents were not happy about it when they found out it existed. Story 6, when I was growing up, my best friend's mom was a hoarder. Not the type that keeps literal trash, but she would buy stuff that she thought she could sell later. There was one time I went over, and she had 2 stoves, a dryer, 3 couches, a couple of stereos, and 34s of a pallet of Christmas wrapping paper in the living room. She's addicted to garage sales and free posts on Craigslist and Facebook, but never actually gets around to selling the stuff. It's all stuff that is decades out of date, too. So nobody really wants it in the first place. In her mind, if she can make $1 off it, then she will buy it and store it. Story 7, going out myself here. Growing up from about the age of 6 all the way up to age 19 when I left home, we had pet chickens that would live in the house with us. On average, we had 3 chickens at a time, but at one time we had 5. They used to sleep in the laundry at night, in their own repurposed wax banana boxes for each hen, paper towels and newspaper lining the bottom of the boxes, and a tightly rolled up towel in the middle for them to perch on. During the day, the chickens had free range of the backyard and our lounge room. Their food and water bowls were laid out neatly just inside the front door, where they would happily come and go. It wasn't unusual to find the hens sleeping either underneath our dining table or perched on the designated roosting chair during the hottest parts of the day. And yes, they did inside the house all the time, and they would drop feathers and dander when they molted. We had a poo bucket that was kept in the lounge room, where we put all the cleaned up from off-the-floor furniture, and when that got full, the contents were flushed down the toilet, which of course caused quite a few blockages. The chickens were very friendly and would often come up to you and perch on your leg for pats and cuddles. As a kid, I used to sit on the floor every afternoon and evening watching TV with at least one hen perched on my leg enjoying some cuddle time. Looking back now, I know that this is hella weird, but they were treated equally just like a family cat or dog would be, and the eggs we got from them were some of the best I've ever had in my life, and I never once got sick with salmonella. But yeah, I wouldn't recommend having house chickens, unless you're prepared to clean up a lot of. Edit wow, I never expected this comment to blow up so much. It warms my heart knowing that you all found my quirky little house chickens so fun and interesting to talk about. Thank you. Story 8, a friend stored her strawberry jam in the bathroom cabinet, alongside other toiletries. When I asked why, she just shrugged. Can't judge her, she's having a shitty year. Story 9, their utensil drawer was full of teeth, not even arranged by size and type, not in their little dividers, just teeth everywhere. It was like they just took a bucket of surplus teeth and just poured it into the drawer. I'm fine with teeth drawers. Don't get me started on drawers for teeth. My problem is that they kept the utensil divider in there despite not having utensils in the house. I don't know, I would just like to see a bit better organization. Re how we store hundreds of assorted teeth. Edit what if it was an emergency and you needed a specific molar. Story 10, my best friend in high school had a poster on her wall that said be thin. She would cover it up with a tapestry when friends came over, but she forgot to cover it up when I came over one day, and she rushed to do it, but I had already seen it. It turns out her father was constantly fat-shaming her. She was maybe 15 to 16 when this happened, and this was her motivation to lose weight. Her family knew about the poster and had no concerns. Story 11, a friend up the street had a picture of a guy on his living room wall that was framed. Normal-looking guy with a beard sitting in a chair. I asked him once who the man was an uncle. No, he says, that's God. I was too young at the time to really think anything more about it. It was not until years later I found out his family had been involved in a cult, and the picture of that man was their leader. Story 12 through grades 8 and 9. I was friends with an upper-middle-class girl from a family that did those yearly portraits where everyone wore a matching turtleneck and blue jeans. The first thing I saw when I walked into the house was a very large framed photo of her mother, completely. The photo was from a boudoir shoot she had bought to mark her 40-something birthday. She had other, much less photos from the same shoot that were scattered around the house, but they were so small and out of the way that you barely noticed them. This one took up an entire wall and was one of the first things you would see upon opening the door. It was the centerpiece of the foyer. Since my friend was fairly popular and had a big house, she hosted a lot, so most of our classmates had seen it at one point or another. Whenever someone asked, she would say something about how her mom just loved having family pictures around to look at. Story 13, there was a lot of penis art. There was always a rumor that his dad was gay and his mom was a lonely woman married to him. We were kids, so we thought the penis art was hilarious. Cut to years later, I left the neighborhood in 6th grade. Ran into my friend in my mid-20s, asked him how his parents are doing. My dad came out of the closet and my mom committed suicide 2 years ago. They were all good people. I hate that things turned so badly for her. I try to avoid social media, this Reddit account, and an Instagram account where I only follow my siblings and their husbands and wives. That's all. I can't take bad news about people that were good to me as a kid. I suppose I'm a bad friend. Story 14, we had 2 German foreign exchange students in my class in high school, and we asked them this question. We heard the usual portion and car sizes. Then they said it's weird that we have carpet in the bathroom. We were all confused by what she meant, but we learned the host family they were staying with had carpet in their bathrooms. And not talking shower mat, fully carpeted bathrooms. I can only imagine the smell and musk. It was fun explaining to them that that's just weird in general, not just a weird American quirk. Story 15, I used to work for a cable TV company. One house we went into was known as the cat house. If you were downwind from the house, you could smell the ammonia from the cat. We had to go inside to install their internet. Dozens upon dozens of cats everywhere. The smell was vomit-inducing. The air inside the house was heavy and moist and reeked. There was a giant hole in the side of the couch, and the cats went inside the couch. I can only imagine it was lovely inside the couch. They just dumped cat food onto the kitchen table, and the cats would just climb the table and eat. The rest of the house was horrid. We had to make excuses to go out to get things from our trucks so we could breathe. We went into the house in shifts. There were two adult couples living in the house looking to be in their 30s. They just sat on the couch, the same one with the hole, and acted like they didn't notice the smell and acted like everything was completely normal. There was a different house, I remember, where the basement floor was completely covered in dog. You were unable to walk in the basement without stepping in it. They apparently never removed it, as there were piles of several feet high of dog in various parts like they shoveled it there. We refused to go down there and left. Story 16, my friend had a room in their basement that was full of all sorts of containers filled with water, like bottles, jugs, jars, buckets, etc. I asked why they had all that, and she shrugged and said in case we ever need them. Never question it again. Story 17, honestly, this happened when I was really small. I went to spend the night at a friend's house, and her family was so nice to her. They didn't tease her or be mean to her. They let her talk. They laughed. I thought families like that were only on TV. Story 18, in my friend's house, the kids were only allowed to call their parentes by their names. They were not allowed to say mom and dad. Also, when my friend talked about her mom, she was like, Susan told me that we can play. Today it is still like that. I still find it very weird. We're from Denmark, but that's really not a thing here. Story 19, I had a neighbor who kept large koi fish in buckets in her TV room. It was so weird, and I knew they weren't happy being in such confined swimming dimensions. So I reported her to our local animal welfare society. I was one of many people who visited her, so doubt she suspected me, and from my window, saw the fish being removed fairly soon after. When I emailed again to ask if the fish were okay, I was assured that they were living the dream in their new large garden pond. Story 20, when I was quite young, I went to a friend's house who proudly showed off his older brother's snot wall. His brother picked his nose and smeared it on the wall. The wall was covered. The older brother was in high school at the time. Story 21, their husband, he was running around in a towel fixing to go swimming and asked us if we wanted to join him. And we said no. Next thing I know, he is but naked and goes out the door to the pool. She never flinched. Story 22, fairly well off, mate's parents had a brass life-size statue of an African child slave holding a tray up, stood proudly beside their fireplace. Questions were raised in my subconscious, no doubt. Story 23, in my childhood home, my dad painted hieroglyphics on the walls that led to our refinished basement playroom. There were some confused faces on friends' boyfriends who visited over the years, but to us it was normal. Story 24, I had a friend whose mom gave him the master bedroom. In the attached bathroom was a kitchen chair facing the toilet. We all speculated why it was there, but the best we could come up with is he used the chair to off into the toilet. We asked him why, but he just brushed it off like it's no big deal. Story 25, an old lady in my town had her dog. After it had passed away due to old age, taxidermied, and sitting on her concert piano that was stationed in the middle of her living room. Her house had large windows, so you could see it when passing by that house. It was a large dog. Story 26, I guess I'm a friend in this situation. I had some newer friends over once, and they couldn't believe that I let my butter sit in a marble butter container on the counter instead of in the fridge. It still gets brought up. I thought this was normal. Story 27-6, or 7-year-old gingerbread house in the hallway. It stands there all years around. The kids were not allowed to touch it, but yeah, with 3 kids, traces of nibbles visible. Story 28, my friend's house had a paper on the wall of house rules. A few normal things that I've forgotten, but then one of them said if someone walks into the room and you're masturbating, don't stop. Story 29, she and her husband smoked indoors in an apartment. I totally understand the mindset of not wanting your security deposit back and nit stressing about little dings here and there, but it was disgusting in there. I couldn't believe people smoke cigarettes inside in 2023. Story 30, not friends' houses, but I have seen the following things in people's homes: a shop mannequin dressed in lacy lingerie on the bed, a bathtub full of electrical items like toasters and radios, a toy doll hanging from a ceiling light fitting, mushrooms growing out of the carpet, a weed farm, 3 weed farms, actually about 20 years worth of newspaper stacked up in the bathroom. Oh, and one where the guy had nothing in the front room apart from one chair, a TV, and sword displayed on the walls. Story 31, a Jamaican friend of mine, many years ago, would always have her panties hanging in the bathroom on the shower curtain rail. One day, I asked her about it, and she said that growing up in Jamaica, that was how everyone did it. They would get in the shower and just wash the panties that they were wearing and hang them on the line. That way they always had clean underwear. It was like, yeah, but you're in New York now. Story 32, locks on the kitchen cabinets and the refrigerator, 3 meals a day, no snacking. The family all sat down and ate together. Friend was sent home at mealtime. Story 33, not something I saw, but what I didn't hear when I stayed over at a friend's house for the first time when I was 7 years old, nothing. At night, it was disturbingly quiet. No creaks, beeps, appliances, AC, running water, pipe noises, etc. They were far enough away from other houses and streets where you wouldn't hear other cars or neighbors. What was weirdest, though, was the lack of any ambient nature sounds outside. Silence never felt so loud. Story 34. I lived across the street from this girl. We were both 5 years old. She had 3 brothers. One was 7, one was 2, and one was a newborn. We weren't very close friends, just played outside together when we were both out at the same time. I only went in her house once. When we walked into the living room, her mom was breastfeeding her brother, the 7-year-old one. Even at age 5, I knew that was very, very strange, and I told her I had to go home. Story 35. I had to really think about this one because I don't have that many friends. One friend had a dance floor in their house. It was kind of awesome. Another friend often had a homeless person laying on the couch. It was her dad's house, and some nights had let this one guy sleep over. Story 36. Neighbors when I was a kid would go to Las Vegas for family trips. To family-friendly places, they would win massive amounts of stuffed animals of various sizes, bring them home, and put them in their sunken living room, which was the first thing you saw when you opened the front door. Just all over every space and all of the steps of the sunken part, so that the only thing left clear was most of the floor, huge ones to very small ones. They called it the animal room. So weird. Story 37. One friend and her parents walked around their house in their underwear in front of me. I've house sat or been in some other homes where there was stuff all over their kitchen counters and tables. I don't mean a few things. I mean the entire counter and tabletop covered. So basically hoarders. Story 38. Their dad always took naps on the living room couch and laid his head on the same pillow each time. The first time I slept over, I thought I got lucky because I got the couch, until I lay my head down onto the greasiest, smelliest pillow to ever exist. They laughed so hard and said, haha, you got dad's pillow, like I would have hid that pillow before a friend slept there, haha. Also same family. One day the mom was boiling a huge pot of white rice. I asked what it was for, and my friend told me they give it to their mentally disabled uncle who lives locked up in the garage. I was like, okay, sure, lol. Found out years later that wasn't a lie. Story 39. They fancied themselves art lovers. They had a detailed wooden sculpture of a woman's waist, a torso down just past the hips, positioned right in the living room. First thing you see when you come in the door. Story 40. A coworker was a hoarder. I didn't know this until I wandered into her apartment to help her move. She had done a week of cleaning, and the place was just so disastrous looking still. Story 41. Mom getting drunk and just chilling with the kids and flirting. I thought the party was there because the parents were gone. No, the parents bought the alcohol and threw the party. Apparently this was normal. Later she ended up marrying someone close to her age. I found out that it was the dad of the girl that her son was dating, and they kept dating after the marriage, except lived together and shared a room. I just had a difficult time processing parents and kids of a big happy legal family, all openly under the same roof, and still throwing alcohol-fueled rages for kids all the time. I kind of hear banjos in the background whenever I think about it too much. Story 42. If his dad was at home. He was in a Speedo and nothing else. No exceptions. Didn't matter who was over, what the occasion was, what the weather was. He would be wearing a Speedo. Once I went over, and he was on the roof in the Speedo and some flip-flops, fixing the AC with what appeared to be a very uncomfortable HVAC technician. Story 43. A rabbit, which they trained to use a litter box. White fluffy bunny, just hopping around the living room. As a fan of Monty Python and the Holy Grail, I was a tad concerned. Story 44. There was a dirty bong casually left on the side in the kitchen, and my friend at the time, when I asked what it was, said it was an ornament. Looking back, that was not an ornament. I was like 10. Story 45. Dried chicken legs down to the feet hanging on the wall. I took off my contacts and wasn't wearing my glasses, so when I got up close to it at sniffing distance, I saw the feet and screamed. Story 46. I'm male. Went to a guy's house for the first time to hang out 1980s. I was about 13, and he was a year older. The walls in his room were completely covered in pages from mags. He lived with his mom. He was a fairly nice and very smart guy who became a well-regarded in our high school. It was just so strange to sit in that room. Story 47. When I was in high school, I made friends with this girl that seemed pretty normal. The first time I stayed at her house, I was shocked to find that she would, with the door open, lights off, and with a towel over her head. I feel like she could have warned me ahead of time, especially considering that the bathroom was located right next to the living room where we were watching a movie. Story 48. Not my friend, but was my sister's friends, not anymore thankfully, and the houses were just messy and gross and usually stunk, and apparently when her friend, to go to call Sam, finds it completely normal to masturbate and watch right in the room with her younger siblings. Story 49. A former friend from high school invited me to her house once. She had a couple of small dogs and allowed them to all over the house, and just left it there. There were dog piles everywhere. She didn't acknowledge it or apologize or anything, just invited people over like it was perfectly normal. Needless to say, I did not return. I also know of a very respectable, wealthy family who let their dog on the floor in their house, and they would cover it with newspaper and leave for days at a time until the cleaning company came. They thought they were too good to clean it up themselves, but didn't seem to bother them that they had to dodge piles around the house most days. People are weird. Story 50 child abuse neglect warning. This is a bit sad, but basically it took me way too long to realize my childhood best friend was suffering from neglect. My parents were super controlling in a way that was probably equally abnormal, so we preferred hanging out at her house, because we could kind of do whatever we wanted, but it was still creepy and a little depressing. I saw her parents maybe twice in 10 years of hanging out every other weekend or so. She was the only one who cleaned and took care of the dogs and cleaned up after them as best she could, but it was too much for one person, so the place was always a mess. It was always suffocatingly hot in the main part of the house, and her room was the only clean room. The kitchen table was covered in snacks that the kids would just grab for themselves, but if we wanted to make actual food like spaghetti or something we had to walk down to the store and get it ourselves, the plumbing didn't work well, so we had to be really careful taking showers or flushing the toilets. But it was a small price to pay for freedom, right? One time she got a text and had to leave the room and was gone for like an hour, and she came back crying saying her dad had pushed her against the wall by her neck. I was so angry on her behalf, but I was scared to say anything. She had been over at my house when bad stuff happened with my mom, so we both kind of knew what it was like, but it still makes me shake thinking about it. I started having her over at my place more often because even though my mom was sometimes unpredictable and we couldn't go walking places, my mom would usually back off a little if I had company and would take us to the store if we wanted to make something for dinner or bake treats together. Anyway, for what it's worth, we had some ups and downs, but we still talk. She got out of that house and is doing well, and my mom and I have gone to therapy and worked on our issues, and our relationship is better than ever. Story 51 parents' uncles having with the young girls. Back in the 80s, I met women who thought this was normal and fine. For education purposes, the family I met in the 90s were definitely aware that it was not okay. But it was still happening. One daughter would get too old, 17 to 18, and they had another 15 years old to replace her. Story 52, I visited a coworker's apartment, and she had birds flying and shitting all over the place. Next time she invited me, I suggested an outdoor restaurant to meet. Story 53, after 3 years living in their large, lovely home, sister-in-law arbitrarily decided the kitchen sink had to remain clean and dry at all times. Anything that couldn't go in the dishwasher had to be cleaned or dumped in the bathroom sink down the hall. What the freak over? Story 54, my aunt married my uncle, who had inherited his house from his mother. She lived through World War II and was determined to never ever go through sugar rationing again. She had a basement room filled with refrigerators, which were in turn filled with sugar. Each bag was dated. The earliest I saw was from 1970. They thought it was ridiculous and started using the sugar when they moved in. I recall them mentioning that they had almost finished it just before 9 to 11, and later wondering if she would regret it. Story 55, a kitchen cabinet full of newspapers that had been collected every day over the course of 5 years, starting the day their mother died. The refrigerator had similar mementos. It was very sad. Story 56, not a friend, but my parents to keep a fully assembled, homemade apparatus in the formal living room of their house. The room faces the street. It has no curtains. This thing is robust and very clearly a convertible swing. It was next to the Christmas tree this year. We all just act like it's not there. My parents offered me and my husband their old over-the-door swing, casually, as if this were normal. Story 57, UK house. So this is quite uncommon. Downstairs, they had a room as big as their living room that had the following things: washing machine, dryer, 3 bikes, a plumb toilet, and washing line for indoor drying. Because the room was pretty big, these were all spaced out quite a bit. It wasn't a downstairs bathroom. It didn't have a sink. It wasn't a laundry room, but it did have the equipment in there, too big for that. It was almost like they had an extra room and just put all their miscellany in there. As it was a spacious room, we used to play in there, and he would regularly take it while we were playing. Forgot all about it until I just read this thread. Kind of weird now I look back. Story 58, my friend growing up lived nearby in a cozy, normally furnished house with your average amount of family clutter. Her parents built a fancy new house, so it was their own custom design, and everyone was excited to move in. I was a little let down after all the hype when I walked in for the first time, and it was huge and gleaming and empty. Well, they're still moving. I thought to myself, nope. Years went by, and it was still huge and clean and empty. They had a kitchen table and chairs in an enormous kitchen, and a couch with plastic and TV in the living room. But there was practically nothing else. There were entire rooms that were entirely, sparklingly empty. There was one room that only contained an electric piano up against the wall, squeaky clean, a huge room with just a keyboard. Looking back, it's clear to me that her mom had some OCD or anxiety disorder, and things must have really spiraled for her around that time. She was always cleaning and making sure nothing was left in view. Keeping literally nothing in her big, beautiful house must have given her a sense of control. I always thought my mom was strict and controlling, but my friend always thought my family was wild and kooky by comparison. I feel for her. I don't think she was ever able to understand that the pressure was excessive. Story 59, my friends, two brothers, would play this game where they throw a knife into the floor, trying to get as close to each other's feet as possible without hitting them. One time a knife went right in a dude's shoe, sticking out upright, followed by a pool of blood oozing out. They both just laughed hysterically. Story 60, we had a plumbing call to an apartment once. A newly immigrated family dumped soil in one bedroom and planted plants on the floor, watered the plants directly. Thus, the downstairs neighbors assumed a pipe must be leaking. Story 61, as a child of about 4, in a medium-sized city, my mother once asked a friend of hers around the block to watch me for an afternoon. She was about in her 60s, so to me she seemed ancient. On the way there, my mom said, "Now, this lady has a cat, but you have to promise not to touch it. It's in a cage. It's not for petting or playing with." She went over it twice, and in thinking, geez, fine, won't pet the cat. When we went into the lattice house, the first thing she said was, "Did you tell her about the cat?" And I started getting anxiety because what the heck was with the cat? Well, it wasn't just a cat. I don't know what it was exactly, but it was an exotic pet with a cage long enough for it to pace back and forth. It was in her dining room. She was just a normal old lady, knitting grandma type. Only went there the once, but my mom was friends with the lady, and she would stop by our place and chat. I was no genius kid, but I knew that was really abnormal for someone to have around in the house. It's one of my earliest memories by the time I started school. Most people knew about the lady with the giant cat. Some thought it was a rumor or that it was exaggerated. I would just sort of shudder and say, "I'd seen it myself." Had nightmares about it for years. Story 62, my friend's father was a sketchy AF evangelist. They lived in a small town home with modest furniture and an older car. Their basement had a false wall, and behind it, all the furs, fancy clothes, and jewelry were hidden. Oh, and the cash from the previous week's tithing haul in the tens of thousands in the late 80s in his church. Then there was the whole faith-healing thing he ran in his church and inappropriate stuff with minors. But that's another horrible story. Story 63, I was in 6th grade and had to stay for a week at a friend's house while my parents were out of town. The entire house smelled like, and I found out that his younger brothers would just on the carpet in the corner of their room because their mom would beat them if they were up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. I grabbed my backpack and walked a few miles to my house so I could break in and live like a normal person until my parents got back. Story 64, parents who are together and love one another and love, support, and spend time with their children. Walking into a house filled with love and laughter was such a trip for 10-year-old me. Story 65, funny you would ask. I was doing a little cleaning in my bathroom, and for some reason it took me back to my younger days with my friends as newly married couples with our first homes. Remember going into the bathroom of one of our couple friends' cute little home and could not believe they couldn't see the toothpaste that had splattered all over the mirror, countertop, and the fixture of the sink. It was absolutely nasty, absolutely covered with splattered toothpaste for brushing their teeth. I guess what I was thinking as I was cleaning is I wonder who sees dirt in my house that stands out to them as they wonder why do I not see it. Story 66, two separate friends, one met in middle school. Went over her house for the first time, and when I walked in the door, the smell cat smacked me across the face, walked around the house, and realized that her mother is in fact a hoarder. Everything was absolutely filthy. Garbage, clothes, boxes, anything really, thrown about in every room of the house. They had so many pots and pans that they started storing them on the filthy kitchen floor. Went to use the bathroom another time when I was there, and there was rat on the floor. My friend's room, though, spotless. Always clean, always smelled very nice as well. Moved into her own place, and it's super clean as well. Two met this friend towards the end of high school. She always smelled a bit weird to me, but she was Hispanic, so I assumed that maybe it was whatever her parents were cooking for dinner. Don't come for me. I was a kid, LOL. Went into her house for the first time, and this smell hit me. It was like a mixture of cigarette smoke, wet dog, and food. Super weird. The house was extremely small. 2 bedrooms. The hallway was a bathroom with 2 doors to walk through to the other side of the house. She also had 5 small dogs in there. They never went outside, ever. They pissed, and on the floor on a couple of newspapers her mom would throw down, then discard once they were used. She brought one of the puppies outside once, and it was terrified, shaking violently and whining. When I asked what was wrong, she said, "Oh, he's never been outside before, so he's probably just scared." He had been almost 2 at the time. They also didn't have a washer or dryer. I slept over once, and she let me know to throw a towel down on the side of the bed I was sleeping on. When I asked why, she let me know her puppy had peed on her bed, but she sprayed some cleaner on it, so it should be fine. I was so taken aback by that. She told me that was her only set of sheets, so she had to wait until next week to go to the laundromat. Whenever I went over, even if it was for an hour or two, not even spending the night, I would always smell disgusting after.